Grimm's Fairy Tales. After the Bible, the world's most widely read book, translated into over 100 languages and found in almost every home where there are children. The educational motive of these tales is unmistakable. Cruel though they often are, in the end, wickedness is always punished, goodness rewarded, and the world set to rights again. The fact that problems are worked out in a miraculous way does not diminish the value of these tales. Indeed, it constitutes the fascination they exercise, even on adults.
Once upon a time,
The fairy tale land of the Brothers Grimm. The Brothers Grimm were born in Hanau, a medium-sized town situated on the river Main, not far from Frankfurt. Jacob in 1785 and Wilhelm 1 year later. Their major achievement was to collect and record the old German folk tales, thus ensuring that they'd not be forgotten. It was in the heart of Germany, in the state of Hesse, that they discovered the sources for their collection. Journeying through this landscape in the tracks of the Brothers Grimm, we'll meet Little Red Riding Hood and the Sleeping Beauty, Hansel and Gretel, the Frog King and Snow White, and recall the days when our grandmothers used to tell us fairy tale stories. Stories that usually began once upon a time. For centuries, these tales were handed down orally, told when people were spinning or in the evenings after work, in front parlors and laborers' cottages, and of course, to children before they went to sleep. They were not to be found in books.
Es waren lauter Buben. Eines Tages sagte der König zur Königin.
Shortly after Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were born, their father left Hanau and moved to the small town of Steinau on the road from Leipzig to Frankfurt, the old east-west trade route. Steinau was not an arbitrary choice. 4 generations of the Grimm family lived and worked here. Friedrich Grimm, the boys' great-grandfather, was the church superintendent of Steinau. Their grandfather was the clergyman. From 1730 to 1777, he christened and buried all the reformist parishioners of the town. Father Grimm was the local magistrate, and his sons, here Jacob as a child, grew up in surroundings they would remember fondly in later life. The magistrate's house in which the family lived, the well, the garden, the linden tree. The boys regarded their home as an island of peace, their oasis, as they called it. Many years later, Wilhelm was to write, "The countryside around Steinau is pleasant. We often used to go into the meadowed valleys and up on the hills. Our feeling for nature may well be inborn, as it is with others, but it was in this way that it was nourished and fostered." In the early years of the 19th century, the brothers studied law at Marburg. In the old city, with its castle, its half-timbered houses, its steep lanes, its Renaissance gables and slate-tiled roofs, they discovered an atmosphere that must have had a considerable influence on their later work. They often went for long walks during their years at university. Wilhelm, in particular, delighted in going out in good weather. And Jacob Grimm penned this praise: "Oh, a splendid landscape, more romantic and beautiful at every step. Mountains and hills decked in every shade of green, meadows and little streams. Before me, a village so veiled in trees, one would not suspect its presence were it not betrayed by the smoke climbing from its chimneys." Inspired by their experience of nature and the landscape and by the themes of folklore, the brothers wrote, "Man has been given a good angel, who, when he sets out in life, will accompany him in the familiar form of a fellow wanderer, This benevolent companion is the inexhaustible asset of folk tales and legends. At the home of their revered professor of jurisprudence, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, they made the acquaintance of Clemens Brentano and Achim von Arnim. These two writers were working on a collection of old German songs with the title Des Knaben Wunderhorn. This meeting was the stimulus. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm now started their own collection of songs, legends, and folk tales. 1812 saw the publication of the first volume of their Kinder- und Hausmärchen, but it was to be 7 years before all 900 copies of the edition were sold. That was a disappointing start, but the Grimm brothers pressed on with their task. Jacob Grimm circulated an appeal to others to participate in the work of collection. This was the first public appeal ever made in the field of folklore studies. Sadly, the response failed to match his expectations. The circular was not immediately successful. But whatever tales the Grimms heard told in farming families and middle-class homes, from teachers and storytellers, they wrote down, retaining their original flavor, the fascination of the simple, symbolic language in which they were related.
Close by the king's castle was a large, dark forest, and in this forest, under an old linden tree, there was a well. On very hot days, the king's daughter would go out into the forest and sit on the cool rim of the well. And when she was bored, she would take her golden ball and throw it up in the air and catch it. This was her favorite plaything. Now one day it happened that the golden ball did not fall back into the hand she was stretching up for it, but straight into the water. The princess followed it with her eyes, but the ball vanished, and the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen.
The Frog King is the first story in the first volume of the Grimm brothers' collection, and it's one of the best known. Your clothes, your pearls and jewels, and your golden crown mean nothing to me. But if you will love me, and let me be your companion and playmate, sit with you at your little table and eat off your little golden plate and drink from your little glass and sleep in your little bed, if you promise all this, I shall climb down and bring you back your golden ball. The frog's speaking with a human voice because he's been bewitched. Goat kids emerging intact from the wolf's stomach, apples talking from trees, and loaves of bread from the oven, tales told to children ever since they first started listening. Quiet woods, fields, and meadows, the silvery shimmer of summer grasses, the glowing cornfields, a landscape to stimulate the imagination, a setting for the wonderful events of fairy stories. A town straight out of a picture book. Here is the atmosphere of the tale of Rapunzel.
Rapunzel was the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the sorceress locked her into a tower which had neither stairs nor doors, only a small high window at the top. When the sorceress wanted to enter, she stood below and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had wonderful long hair, as fine as spun gold. And when she heard the voice of the sorceress, she unfastened her braids and wound her hair around a hook on the window. Her tresses fell down 20 ells, and the sorceress climbed up on them. When the old woman realized that the king's son was climbing up to Rapunzel at night, she clutched the beautiful tresses in her rage, wound them several times around her left hand, seized the scissors, and snip, snap, cut them all off.
Here are the rivers and streams of Grimm's fairy tales, the forests and meadows, the towns and villages, and, above all, the palaces and castles in which lived the noble princes and the beautiful princesses.
It so happened that the king gave orders for a feast that was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful maidens in the country were invited, so that his son could choose himself a bride.
It doesn't take much imagination here to conjure up Cinderella and her stepsisters, winsome and fair of face, but wicked and black of heart.
Cinderella had to work hard from dawn till dusk, rising before daybreak to carry water, light the fires, cook, and wash. Besides this, her sisters wronged her in every conceivable way, throwing her peas and lentils into the ashes so that she was forced to stoop down and pick them out again. And they mocked the poor stepchild, shouting, "Now look at the proud princess, the way she's dressed up," and laughed and were well pleased with themselves. "We're going to the wedding at the king's palace."
One of the most talented and dependable storytellers was Dorothea Fiemann. She lived in this house in a village near Kassel. It was one of those happy chances, wrote Wilhelm Grimm in 1819, that we met a countrywoman who told us the most and the best stories. The house has now been renovated and the street names are reminiscent of Grimm's fairy tales. Another source of old stories was Jeanette Hassenpflug. She was one of the brothers' circle of friends in Kassel. And then there was Dragoon Guard Krause, who lived in this little village. We know from his letters that he told the Grimm brothers stories and was rewarded with gifts of cast-off clothes. From 1798 to 1830, apart from their student years, Jacob and Wilhelm lived in this house in Kassel. The years in Kassel were largely devoted to collecting folk tales, a task in which they were helped by their large circle of friends. This is the manuscript copy of the first edition of 1812, with annotations by the Grimm brothers and notes on who told them the stories and when and where. From Männchen, 20th October 1811. Männchen was Wilhelmina von Schwerzell. Wilhelm Grimm often visited her and her family in the manor house at Willingshausen. Friederike Mannel was another member of the circle. She was the daughter of a clergyman in a village in the Schwalm Valley. This note says, Dortchen, 19th of January, 1812. Dortchen was Dorothea Wild, one of the most industrious collectors of stories. She was later to become Wilhelm's wife. In the home of the von Baumbach family at Nentershausen, she recorded some attractive tales to bring back to Kassel. And it was Dorothea who discovered one of the best-known stories in the Grimm collection, Hansel and Gretel.
Well, dear children, how nice of you to come and visit me.
Well, we didn't come to visit you. We're lost. And we hope you'll show us the way home.
Oh, yes, of course. And what are your names?
I'm Gretel. And I'm Hansel.
Hansel and Gretel. I see.
Though they're not built of bread or roofed with cakes, and their windows are not made of clear sugar, some of the cottages in the forests of Hesse do remind one of the Babes in the Wood and the Wicked Witch. A little stable, such as the witch might have kept Hansel captive in, can be found here too. In some Hesse villages, women still bake their bread in the old bakehouses, with ovens like the one in which the old woman wanted to cook poor Hansel.
First, we shall do the baking,
said the old woman.
I've already kneaded the dough and heated up the oven.
At church on a feast day in a Schwalm village, you might well see Little Red Riding Hood.
Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by all who set eyes on her. She wore a little cap of red velvet, and because it suited her so well that she never wore any other, she was called Little Redcap. One day, her mother said, "Come, Little Redcap, here is some cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. But mind how you go, and don't stray from the path, or you'll fall down and break the bottle, and there would be nothing for Granny."
On the altar of the main church in Bad Wildungen, the kings wear crowns decked with lilies and splendid robes of gold thread, once reminded of the dress in the fairy tale.
Allerleirauh went into her closet and took off her mantle of fur. Then she brought out her dress that shone like the sun and shimmered like the moon.
The altar is splendidly decked. The festive table at Allerleirauh's wedding might well have looked like this. And here we see that faith and imagination transformed the earth into a fresh green meadow and the sky into a golden paradise. A tiny fragment of this paradise is captured and held very fast in the words,
"And they lived happily and contentedly ever after."
On the road between Kassel and Marburg, both places in which the Grimm brothers lived for many years, lies the imperial town of Fritzlar, with a history stretching back over 1,000 years. The romantic marketplace, with its Roland fountain, looking almost untouched since the Middle Ages. Below the old stone bridge between the Eder and the Mühlbach, everything seems to be just as it was 200 years ago when the Grimm brothers were born. Chickens and turkeys, ducks and geese stray along the riverbanks. These egg layers and potential Sunday dinners used to exercise people's imaginations, as is evident from the folk tales about them.
Once upon a time, a rooster and a hen decided to travel. The rooster built a handsome cart with 4 red wheels and harnessed 4 mice to it. The hen got in with the rooster and off they drove.
Here is the home of the Dwarf King, where he ruled over his dwarf subjects. Is this perhaps the realm of the giants?
As he was sitting there, a great giant came over the hill. "Do you see that ogre there?" said the father, intending to scare his son into being good. "He's coming to take you away."
And this is where the elves once lived.
Dear little naked mannequins who came hopping and dancing and leaping and took over all the work. They immediately started to stitch and sew and hammer, and they did not stop until everything was finished and ready.
Only a generation or so ago, work was indeed very hard in the villages of Hesse. Many people would have welcomed a visit from the little people, such as they paid to the cobbler in the fairy tale.
A shoemaker had become so poor that he had nothing left but the leather for one pair of shoes. He cut them out in the evening and then went to bed, intending to continue his work the next morning. But when he got up to start work, there stood the shoes on the table, already made and nicely finished.
Nothing is impossible in fairy tales. Beautiful girls are turned into geese, bewitched princesses herd geese, a gooseherd wins a king's crown in the realm of the dead, and his geese are transformed into white sheep. Dwarves live under roots. Weird rocks are really princes turned into stone, or giants. In fairy tales, the underdog is given a chance. Little Däumling survives perilous adventures to win the king's daughter and a sack of gold. The valiant little tailor tricks the giant and gains his respect.
I am the giant. What sort of midget are you?
I am the valiant little tailor.
Valiant little tailor? What's that? You're so small, you can't be valiant.
Then read my belt.
Read your belt? 7 at one blow. You must be as strong as a bear.
I am the strongest in the land.
Then if you're so strong, perhaps you can help me carry a tree.
Nothing easier.
What will you carry?
The branches, of course.
The heavy branches with all their leaves?
Yes, I'll carry them, and you take the trunk on your shoulders.
Look, that tree down there. We'll carry that. Just a moment.
You put the tree on your shoulder.
I'll just get it on my shoulder. Tailor?
I'm right here.
Tailor, help me. It's so heavy. Can you manage, Tailor?
Yes, of course.
How strong the tailor must be.
Sleeping Beauty is the story of a princess bewitched by a wicked fairy. It could have been at the Sababurg near Kassel that she lay in a 100-year sleep.
All round the palace, a hedge of thorns began to grow. It grew taller every year, and finally it surrounded and covered the whole palace so that nothing more of it could be seen, not even the royal standard on the rooftop. From time to time, kings' sons came and tried to break through the hedge to reach the palace, but they could not get through because the thorns clutched at them like hands and trapped the young men.
Da kam ein junger Königssohn, 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 da kam ein junger Königssohn, Königssohn.
In the 15th century, the Landgraves of Hesse laid out a park for wild animals in the fields and meadows below their hunting lodge. There's a modern-day zoo at the Sababurg now. Beneath the centuries-old oaks, many a wanderer may have been startled by owls flying out. Perhaps the strange tales told of these nocturnal birds stem from such experiences.
A few hundred years ago, a strange event occurred. By some chance, one of the great owls, known as horned owls, flew from the neighboring woods into a barn in the town and did not dare to fly out of this retreat again. When the servant entered the barn the next morning, he was so terrified at the sight of the owl that he ran away and told his master there was a monster in the barn.
Fairy tales are a curious blend of the gruesome and the comic, good fairies and wicked ones, summer and winter.
In winter, when the snow lay deep on the ground, a poor boy had to go out with a sledge to fetch wood. And when he had gathered the wood, he was so frozen with cold, he did not want to go home until he had made a fire and warmed himself a little. He scraped the snow away, and when he had cleared the ground, he discovered a tiny golden key. Where there is a key, there must be a lock, he thought. So he dug into the earth and found a little iron chest. If only the key would fit, he thought. No doubt there's something precious in that chest. He tried it, and the key fitted exactly. So he turned it once, and now we must wait till he has finished unlocking it and opened the lid, and then we shall find out what wonderful things lay in that little chest.
The tale of the Golden Key is the 200th and the last of Grimm's fairy tales, tales which are still read and related all over the world. The collections and scholarly studies of the brothers Grimm were of great value in rescuing German folklore from neglect. The Grimms did pioneer work for the history of literature.